This is the 7th video that I've made about demand curve strategies. Here I'm going to talk about brand loyalty curves as opposed to demand curves, and you'll see what the differences are as we go. Give me some continuity. I've talked about in the first video about brand loyalty curves, about what you see when you ask them and analyze them by respondent. Now I am going to look at what you will see when you analyze them by volume for these respondents and the value, because remember, we've got them by price. Okay, in the first video I talked about the difference between asking people what is your usual brand and asking them a trade-off. If all these brands sell at 50 Rand, which one would you buy? If the price of that brand increases by about 10%, it becomes 55 Rand, which one would you buy? And I said you get a lot more out of asking the second question, which you can do in any survey. So it's not suggesting that you drop your usual surveys. So far I've talked about these brands in a sort of hypothetical price spectrum. I thought I might as well show you what the real prices are, just so that we have that on record. I looked at the Makro website, and there they sell them by case loads, that they also specially mark when these brands go on promotion. I've now looked twice, and so there are some brands that I haven't yet seen on promotion. You will see that when they go into promotion, most of these brands come down to about 50 Rand, which happens to be the lowest price that we had in our model. For a brand like Heineken, which normally sells at 65 Rand, you save 20%. For a brand like Amstel Lager, you save 23%. I haven't yet seen a Castle Light, but Castle Lager goes from 55 to 47, and Castle Lager is the brand that we, towards the end of this presentation, will talk a lot more about. Okay, you saw that Heineken was normally selling at 65 Rand. On this promotions come down to 50 Rand, which is about the level that we tested here. We said if all brands sell at 50 Rand. So our respondents, 32% said Heineken is the usual brand. The moment we said, well, if all these brands sell at 50 Rand, remember that is not what happened with the Makro promotion. Because Heineken was brought down to 50 Rand, the others would have stayed at their normal prices, except when they came down. Heineken took a 20% price decrease on that. Our sample said, well, 38% of them said, now I will buy Heineken. Let's now go to loyalty curve. I showed you demand curves before. Loyalty curve is slightly different. We say if all sell at 55 Rand, which one would you buy? We said that is 38% of the respondents said they would. Now let's index that at 100%. And we then look at, of those, how many remain loyal when the Heineken price goes up to 55 Rand, goes up to 60 Rand, etc. And you'll see how fast it loses these people that were loyal at 50 Rand. Well, not loyal. What they were is they were preferred Heineken when all the brands were selling at 50 Rand. It sells at 65 Rand, which is what it normally does. 29% of the respondents said they would buy it. So we've set up some comparison. You now understand a brand loyalty curve works for the respondents that said they would buy the brand if it sells at parity, 50 Rand each. When we then increase the price, how many of those would still buy? And the main point that I want to show you here is brand loyalty curves differ dramatically. Windhoek Light, for instance, will only have 33% of its so-called loyal of brand preference remaining loyal, whereas Amstel Lager will have 67%. And now back to Heineken. Remember, this is the loyalty curve at 100% here. is 38% of the respondents when all brands sell at 50 Rand. We did ask them, well, we know their volumetrics, how much do you buy, how many carry packs do you buy in a month? So we can come up with a volume curve, the red curve. If you compare that to the number of respondents, the blue curve, you'll see it's slightly below most of the while, indicating slightly lighter users than the average or than respondents would have. And then if you look at the value curve, which is the green curve, well, there we just multiply the value at the different prices with the volume. And you'll see these lines are very well correlated. Compare that with Castle Lite. Castle Lite has quite a drop from 50 Rand to 55 Rand price increase. Thereafter, not as much as Heineken had. In fact, when it gets to about 65 Rand a carry pack, it stabilizes with 33% of the respondents remaining loyal up to 80 Rand, they say, which means our volume remains static, still a slightly lighter user, but the value will go up because each time they pay more for the volume that they buy. Compare that to Castle Lager. This is interesting. Castle Lager was the third biggest brand in our survey. We set that again at 100 and look at what happens to the brand loyalty curves. Well, the respondents will drop very rapidly down to, when it gets to about 70 Rand, there's a bit of a hardcore, but certainly from 100 to 45 to 36 to 27. Respondents will still buy it at these levels. However, they are heavy users. You can see when you look at the red line, how far that is above the blue line. And if you now multiply the volume line by the prices at these different levels, there is virtually no drop after 55 Rand. In fact, Castle Lager will sell more in value at 80 Rand than at 55 Rand, according to these respondents. Remember, we are now dealing with very small samples. An interesting thing here is that the sample was taken towards the end of the rugby season. And Castle Lager was a heavy advertiser throughout the rugby season, and it's presumable that the Castle loyal users are also more rugby fans. They can virtually set their prices at any level after 55 Rand. Having just seen how Castle Lite and Castle Lager have very good brand loyalty curves. Castle Lager on a smaller user base, but really a brilliant user. And we don't know whether the advertising has affected that or not. I don't have that data available. If you now look at Windhoek Lite, that is a sad curve. And let's hope your brand is not. So let's have a look. I introduced brand loyalty curves by respondent in the first talk about brand loyalty curves. Now I looked at what happens to your volume and value share. And of course, that is where the real trick lies. You can't get these insights from a usual brand or such like question. You need to ask questions about money, and you also need to, at some stage, understand the difference between a demand curve and a brand loyalty curve. Demand curves is really made up of a lot of brand loyalty curves, and look at advertising effects. In the next one, I'm going to talk a little bit about theory. If there's any questions you have, I've added an email address that will get to me.